At this point in time, most of us know the brief history of Breguet. We know that their watches are very important in the realm of watchmaking, in the developmental history. We know that their pocket watches were given to Napoleon Bonaparte, the Duke of Wellington. But more importantly, and an aspect that really ties in this whole marine side of things, is that Breguet was one of the pioneers in the marine chronometer category. Marine chronometers are simply extremely accurate clocks that would be used on ships as they traveled across the world. And these ships needed these reference times not only for themselves, but to help navigate the longitudes and latitudes across the oceans. So naturally, this gave Breguet huge, immense international acclaim. Everyone wanted a Breguet marine chronometer. And I love that element, the story and that history that blends so well into this sports category that Breguet calls it, the Marine series. So not only is the history and the development interesting, but then we look to the actual styling of the watch. And the model that we will be paying most attention to is the reference 5517. What I've said often about Breguet is that I really admire their styling. All of the individual elements that you see on these pieces are pretty much owned by Breguet. They brought it to the forefront. The most simple and defining features of a Breguet watch: coin edging around the case. This was done originally because pocket watches were very difficult to hold. The idea behind the coin edging was to add that extra level of tactility. Naturally, this became very iconic to the Breguet name and is now an element that has been incorporated with all of their pieces, and it looks superb. Next is to look at the lugs on the case. Now, most of the time we see that watches' lugs taper from the case, where with these pieces, especially the more classically inspired watches, lugs are soldered onto the cases. And this whole up-down geometric nature is another element that we can tie to Breguet and classic watchmaking. Those two elements alone help you define a Breguet watch. You could probably see this watch from across the room and know that it is a Breguet. And it's quite amazing for that reason. Again, circling back to that whole idea of the family understanding their design language, it's amazing to see just how these classique-inspired motifs have been translated into this modern sports watch. So what has been done that has made this marine watch so interesting and that's really caught my attention? We notice that the lugs and the integrated bracelet looks almost seamless, attached onto the body of the watch. We see the coin edging, very characteristic. We notice that the crown guards of the watch resembles a propeller if you look at it from the side. Another interesting touch. And if we are to then focus on the dial, it is just simply Breguet in the way it has been approached. We notice the typical Breguet hands and Roman numerals, which is quite interesting. There's no guilloche on the dial, but instead a rhodium-plated finish, which is very attractive. And the point of contention that seems to irritate a lot of purists is the idea of luminova being set inside the Roman numerals. It takes you a little bit of time to get used to the idea, but I find it to be a fascinating exercise. Only Breguet could really get away with doing something like this. Often there are debates about whether a watch should sit in the camp of either being a sports watch or a dress watch. This piece rides the line very well. It seems more like a dress watch than a sports watch for the most part. But then we are drawn back to the idea that it incorporates luminova, so it is extremely legible in the dark. It uses a full titanium case and bracelet. The scale and proportion is quite contemporary for the most part. 40 millimeters instead of the conventional 38, 37 mils that we see with most dress watches. And from every angle we can appreciate this piece for a different reason, and I think that's what really draws it to me. Very seldom do we see watches that manage to take such a direct inspiration from their dress watches and make a very efficient and great looking sports watch. Of course, these pieces aren't exactly attainable in the scheme of things, but it is a very novel approach. The understated nature of the piece is also interesting. The fact that you could wear this and no one would recognize it unless they were watch enthusiasts themselves. And within this 5517 collection, you have a chronograph, you have an alarm. Personally, I don't find them to be as well executed as just the standard time and date reference. But in a typical Breguet fashion, we notice that the dial has been arranged very interestingly. The proportions have been used in a pocket watch way. We notice offset hands for power reserves and the like, accents and highlights used to emphasize various areas. But I might go so far to say that I find these pieces, especially just the standard reference, to be quite the work of art. Now yes, you could say that Breguet is trying to jump onto the sports watch bandwagon. The Marine family has been around for a long time. This model in particular, the reference 5517, looks to be something else. It's almost as if the design team or the creative side of the family really sat back and thought to themselves, how could we make something that blends the idea of classical styling with something a lot more sports oriented? The functionality also plays through, looking at the various elements. I really like the idea, the novel approach of making it out of titanium. So you really wouldn't feel this watch on the wrist. And for the average wrist, 40mm with a very straight lug design looks small. It doesn't look large or oversized. The idea of incorporating a series of leather straps or rubber straps to the build, also amazing. It's crazy just how simple the watch looks when it doesn't have a bracelet. It looks just like a dress watch. And the whole idea of having this sports watch that could double as a dress watch really is the end-all, be-all game plan, right? Having the ability to swap out straps on the fly, wear the same watch, keep it very elegant and understated, meanwhile knowing in the back of your mind that you are wearing a masterclass, a real powerhouse, excellent top-of-the-line movement, sports watch-like functionality, finish and attention to detail unparalleled by many of the haute horology brands, and just attention, I would even say passion, put into every element on the watch. The less is more approach is very compelling and appealing. Now what could we say? This watch targets the enthusiast, for sure. It targets someone who really appreciates Breguet, maybe someone who is solely dedicated to the brand. So it's not exactly a watch that will reach the wider population, especially when you look at the prices of them. But I find it to be such a novel approach. So understated, clear, concise, well thought through. And I don't think these watches have received anywhere near the right amount of praise. What are the real points of contention with this watch? Well, of course, at first, it's the whole idea of trying to work out whether it is a sports watch or a dress watch. From a design point of view, I think it rides the line very well. It's then trying to rationalize who this watch is really made for, and I would say it's more geared towards the enthusiast. But at the same time, for someone who is into this hobby and wants to get out of all of their pieces and have one truly special watch, this really does tick the boxes. The development and the storytelling behind the Marine name has always been something that has fascinated me. And how these motifs and this approach has been streamlined, we could even say, and put into these new pieces, I think it's just fascinating. And a reference from the family that I hope more people will look at with greater detail.